Welcome. You are listening to Our Mindful Nature, formerly titled The Mindful Minute. I'm your host, Meryl Arnett, and this podcast explores the deep connection between land and self through nature-based meditations and meditative experiences that invite us back into belonging to each other, to our ancestors, to the earth, and to all beings that make up this universe. If you would like to access these meditation practices as standalone audio files, please subscribe to my newsletter at merylarnett.com. It's free, and you'll receive a new mini meditation each week, along with behind-the-scenes content and bonus material for each podcast episode. All right, grab a cup of tea, pop in your headphones, and find a comfy seat. Let's settle in for today's episode. Welcome, friends, to another episode of Our Mindful Nature. Today, my dear friend, colleague, and teacher, Dr. Chanti Tacoronte-Perez, is joining us to talk about divination, somatic wisdom, and the magic of birds. Dr. Chanti is a Cuban-American artist, author, ritualist, and non-clinical depth psychologist. She believes that images speak a profound language. Her life's work is translator of the unseen and an advocate for the imaginal. She holds 2 master's degrees in engaged humanities and depth psychology from Pacifica Graduate Institute. In 2023, she completed her doctoral dissertation in the work of translating the image of the wound. Her work and her teaching follows and welcomes imagination, creativity, dreaming, and deep rest. Today, we're exploring a new somatic oracle created by Dr. Chanti titled Birdsong. So together, we're going to talk about divination and oracle cards, my favorite things. We're going to talk about what it means to be a somatic oracle deck and what happens when we tune into the body rather than the guidebooks. We explore deep listening, trusting, translating the wisdom of our bodies and the natural world. We talk about migration, birds, landlessness, and the meaning of home. And at the end, Dr. Chanti guides us through a gorgeous bird meditation. I'm so excited for you guys to hear and participate in that experience. So grab a comfy seat outside if you can do it. Make sure you've got a little bit of space around you. You've got a journal and a pen nearby. And let's tune in for today's episode. Chanti, welcome back. I'm so glad to have you here under the auspice of Our Mindful Nature. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, it was so fun to have a little surprise cameo appearance from you a couple weeks ago when I announced the name. Thank you for that little bit of grace and allowing me to clip that segment in. I really appreciate it. We are here to talk about Birdsong, a brand new somatic oracle deck from you. And I thought maybe we would start with like the broader, more general oracle divination in general. I know you and I have had many conversations about this. What is that to you? Why do you use it? Why do you like it as a tool? What does it mean to you?
Oh, wow. That's a big question. Usually when I do or practice my divination, it's almost like, or right now I'll say, I'm in the season of having divination be a kind of doorway or portal for my day. In a sense, like my day starts really early, but then it like has these like little sections. And when I come to this place where I'm sitting at now, which is where I do a lot of my creative work, it's kind of the first thing that I do before, like I have a lot of journals and I have a lot of to-do lists. And I think it helps me just to like shift from taking my dog out or making the breakfast foods And it allows me to come into my practice in a more, I want to say, in a ritualed way, and also with like a different kind of story, whether, and I just don't, I don't go to like one specific deck. And I honestly don't ever read the books, but I think it's a nice kind of collage to set, like an image to set motion my creative practice. And sometimes I do divination as divining, like, oh, what card am I going to get? Or what image is going to appear? And sometimes I feel it's really helpful to like look through the cards. And if I'm doing something that feels really difficult or I don't want to do it necessarily, then those images for me act as like, come on, you can, or here's some support, or it just helps me to just shift my perspective a little bit and to kind of move into this my morning. And then there are other times that I do other divinations, like I'm upstairs now, and then I have like a downstairs. And when I do my like pelvic steam, I have like a whole other divinatory practice that I do down there. And again, it's just helpful to kind of transition into a space and time for what is being done or cared for or thought about in that moment. I used to also do it like before going to sleep. I had a different deck. And I love them because it's almost like having a little museum in the palm of your hands, and it could be anything. It could be, things that you create, or oracles or tarot, or sometimes just words. And it's almost like a threshold. I think that's what I'm saying. It's a threshold for me. The actual pictures or images or colors or words that come in combination, they're like mini thresholds and super handy. You can take them anywhere, which is why I love them.
I love that. I love the imagery of like a museum in your hands. That's so lovely. I'm going to think of that from now on. And I have my little collage, I do my collage that
Oh,
you taught me,
yeah.
which has become a really incredible tool. I think it's one of my favorite tools, in all honesty, is a practice around creating this oracle collage at the start of the month or the new moon or whenever you choose to do it. And it's, as you named, it's not divination, like what card am I going to get? And maybe you want to describe that practice really quick, just for a moment.
Yeah, I almost want to call it a synchronicity. You can't necessarily make it happen, but sometimes it feels like it's a mini form of like you're almost like inviting or welcoming a synchronicity. Sometimes it's difficult to, or we're not sure how we're feeling or what our internal weather report might be. And sometimes having a mirror that's not reflecting our actual face and body and eyes and nose. But if we have a different kind of mirror, then that might help us to take the next step or to adjust or to shift. And so when you take an oracle deck and you look at, you look at the image, and you almost, and this is the practice that we do at the beginning of the month. Again, this is a threshold, right? The beginning of the month, the beginning of a new moon. And you're just kind of looking through and waiting for a moment of recognition, attraction, repellent, just something that says, like it's taking a little, it's just speaking out to you in a different way. And then you can, you can put that card to the side and feel like, okay, I'm gonna wait. And I go through I can go through many decks in that way, and then kind of like edit it out a little bit and see, or sometimes you have like 5 cards and they're not individual, they create something more whole. It's almost like you have a small mirror, like a pocket mirror, and you can only see like your eye, your lips. And then you have like a bigger mirror, and then you can see like your head and shoulders. And then if you have a few more cards, you're like at the full length. And it's still the same thing you're looking at. You're looking at one image, but you're seeing it from maybe a different vantage point. And so we don't have to only choose like one card or two cards, and they don't have to act as separate entities. They can weave together and work together, and you can see it more as like a whole collage. And I like doing that because it's helpful sometimes to notice what sometimes I don't, I'm not everybody, but sometimes I just don't. Like today I woke up and I was like, I was just feeling good. But we use that word like, okay, good, bad, happy. And sometimes when you put those cards or you look at, oh, what is this sensation or feeling in a different way, then you get like a texture and a color, and you don't necessarily have to name it. You just see that reflection or that kind of invitation of having a synchronistic moment and say, oh, it's just more interesting. I keep saying that. It's just
Yeah.
makes my life, it makes like my day just more interesting. And there's another word. Anyway, I would have to pick a card to find that word.
You
Or
know, for me, that word is joyful. I don't know if that's your word, but I find it to be an incredibly joyful way to help me interact with what is happening inside that maybe I can't quite grasp
Mhm.
without a little added tool, a little added nudge.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about your deck, specifically Birdsong. I'm so excited. I've gotten a little over a week to play with it, to work with it in my own practice. Do you want to talk a little bit about maybe the origin story of Birdsong to get us started? And then I want to go into specifically the somatic aspect of the deck.
Since we last talked about doing this podcast and talking about birdsong, I did a kind of nerdy, I don't know if anybody's ever done this before. You do like a really geeky, nerdy deep dive into your own journals to
Yes.
to look back at the origin story, because it's been a while now. And I want this deck, this practice, this project, this gift came at a time where it came at like a parallel time where I was in I think it was the first year of a 5-year journey. This is 2018 now, because I like got the dates. So in 2018, I was in a dream class at school, and we were working with dreams. And then I think it was the next year we were working with, I was in a somatics class, which we also worked with dreams. And so I started to track my menstrual cycle with my dreams. And so I went back and I looked at when this actually started to birth in the way that I feel like, oh, this is kind of manifesting into the world now as these kind of paper images. And so it was the summer of 2018, kind of July, and I wrote the dreams down. And so if you like, I can share them.
I love that.
So there were 3 dreams, and then there was a thread pulled to a dream that I had, oh, many, many, many years ago, almost like, I want to say like 20 years ago now, which if you've been to any of my dream practices or dream groups, you've heard the dream. And so that dream was a very simple, tiny dream. And it was of a little mouse, and the little mouse had overalls, and it said, "There's something real inside of you," in this huge voice. And I worked with that dream forever. I'm still working with that dream. And then there was 2 other dreams. And I'm trying to weave this web, so just bear with me. All right, so here's one dream. and I'm just going to read it to you. There's a bathhouse of people who can't bathe themselves, all women. Some are in wheelchairs, some just can't move in certain ways. I help them take a bath, shower, wash their hair, massage their shoulders and scalp. They are not expecting such care. They just want to soap and leave. I give them care, wash hair, make sure water is warm enough. It's like a water park for women. I take honor and pride in my work. The very next day, this is another dream. I'm looking for a voice. It's not one, but many. The voice is a chain of hands, women linked at the heart. And then I drew a little picture of like hands together. The message comes through. The wound is a doorway, a portal. Wounding happens to open. In this case, a spiral or a chain of those hands coming together. And then about a week later, I'm working on a dream with this old dream about the mouse having the overall. So I'm doing some dream work. And this is what comes through in like a relaxed state, a different state of consciousness, like restful, laying down practice and working with dreams. Mouse lady shows up, no overalls. She doesn't need overalls in this circle. She feels protected. Overalls are only necessary outside. She shows me how to make a doll. Sew or hot glue a head of a stuffed animal to the top. And then I drew a little picture of like a body at the bottom. She shows me each one and then the collective, many linked as a web. And then she shows me Carpinteria, which is a beach on the West Coast. She shows me Carpinteria Beach. Go there this morning. So those are kind of, so after I had the first dream of the women bathing, and the very next day I had that dream of that voice and the collective, I looked back and that's when I started to make these, there were just, where's my flamingo? There were images of more like bodies of women. And then I had all these cut out, I just collaged, yes, a wolf, a flamingo, a bear, a dog, there's a dog. Mm-hmm. And it was almost, and I say this with a lot of love, it was a very kind of obsessed feeling like they had to come out. And I remember the feeling. I didn't remember the dream. I didn't remember any of this for a very long time. I just remember the feeling of cutting out these images and having my whole room lined with them. Then I would sit in the middle and I would just sing. I would just hum and sing, looking at all these I don't know, bird-headed, animal-headed body part peoples. And when I started kind of, I'm just going to use the word working with them, being with them in space, I realized that something was happening to me. I realized that, and we've talked about this before, but I'm someone it's hard for me to articulate what I feel, what I want to say, how I want to say it. I like loop around and don't feel like I make sense. But when it comes to creating images, it's almost like it's so helpful to translate that for myself as an image, as a picture, as a doodle. And then it just feels like whatever was inside has a place to be and has a place to land. And then over time, I realized that, oh, this is not only helpful for me, it can be really helpful for things that are difficult to express. And what I didn't realize, this was also the origin of the thesis, of like my whole thesis, because when was it? Let me look here. Let's see, July 17th, This is probably it's one of the oldest times that I actually write about the wound. The wound is a doorway, a portal. Wounding happens to open. And so it makes so much sense to me now, because this deck and this project was a parallel, like, sister, friend, pal, guide, confidant to that whole huge doctoral work that was all on wounding. And so it's almost like I could navigate that place of pain and hurt and this idea of, like, where do I belong? Where am I from? And this is what actually held, I actually took a whole chapter out of my dissertation about this deck, because, or these, at that point, it was more like just the images, because it did hold a lot of space for me. It held that web of, like, now this can be your voice. We don't have to speak. You don't have to speak by yourself. You can speak through us. You can have, like, a dialogue with us. And it can be a place for your voice to kind of echo, or for you to find your voice, or for you to test drive what it might feel like, through the voice of the flamingo, or through the voice of the bear, or through the voice of all. And then eventually it became all of these different emotions and feelings, and getting that out somatically. The
Ooh,
long-winded.
there's so many threads I want to pull on that. I'm like, where do we go next? Thank you. I'm going to go with thank you for sharing, like, the real actual origin story, which is so lovely to hear, right? Is that I think it's so easy to frame things as like, well, I had this idea and I sat down and I did it over, I know that's not you, but that's
I
me. And
wish.
right, like, it's so lovely to hear about the web underneath the finished product, right? Because it's not this linear, clear cut. It was this beautiful, evolving, and, like, co-creative almost experience, it sounds like. And I love hearing that. And listeners, I'm going to link to Chanti's interview on dream work, because we did an interview on the podcast a handful of years ago about dream work. And I cannot recommend her dream stuff more. But let's stay focused on the deck. Let's go with the somatic thread, because you said something at the beginning, and I'll pull it in here. You said you almost never look at the book when you work
No,
with an oracle deck.
no.
And I was like, what the heck, when you said that to me for the first time? Because I read the book, and that's the first thing I do. I bet that's the first thing a lot of us do.
Yeah.
And so when I received this deck and the word somatic is right there on the front, I was like, oh yeah, okay. She's not going to give me the answer.
No, I went back and forth a lot. I really, really did, because I know people love the book, and the books are amazing sometimes. And, if we think about the little museum in your hand, or if we think about when we go, and this happens to me too, and here's a practice for all of us listening. Go to a museum and don't read whatever is near the painting. Just have an experience with what the creator made.
Mm.
If you're an author writing a story, we want you to read the words. If the story is illustrated, we want you to pause and be with the image as you turn the page. But as somebody who creates things that sometimes have words and sometimes don't have words, it's very difficult to then add words to something that we want you to have an experience with. And so when I really started working with the Birdsong, I had my room was filled with all of these images on the ground. And then eventually I started to draw them and put them up on the walls. And I started to learn about the feeling, or even what feeling would accompany what birdsong by taking its shape. You know, so if we go outside and we mimic, and we see this in nature, mimicry happens in nature, you know, as protection, as repellent. When things begin to mimic, they grow different ways. And so if we just take on the shape of one of those birdsong and then see what would come next. And so I started to do that. I started to just begin with the shape. And this is how some shapes were created. This is how some of the feelings were. Again, it wasn't linear. Sometimes the bird came first. Sometimes the shape of the body came first. Sometimes the feeling came first. Sometimes they got changed and shifted. You know, it wasn't like, oh, joy. It's always, you know, the hands up in the air, and, you know, it wasn't always like that. But sometimes when we take on a shape like joy and we have the hands up in the air, it does something to our body, right? Our lungs expand, our chest opens. And then what would happen if we just shifted that? Because we're not, you know, feelings are not static. We say, I feel, you know, I'm panicked, I feel panicky, or I feel frustrated, or I feel joyous. But it could be fleeting, right? It could be from one moment to the other. We can listen to a song and completely, our whole world change. We can go outside and listen to the birds. And I just read this study of like how listening to the birds, and it's like, of course, it's like stress relief, like force bathing or shinrin yoku. That's the Japanese word for it. You go into nature, or you're being with nature, you're going on a hike, and your whole world changes. The other day I was sitting here and I was editing, you know, doing some editing on this. And my husband was like, I'm going up to the mountain. Do you want to come? And I was like, no, I want to finish on number 25. I got to get through. And then I was like, wait. Let me shift here. And it was such a complete change of your whole body changes. And so going back to the question of the book and what an author writes, it does not come with like a blank slate. We don't come with no life, and we don't come with no story. We come with, you know, a lot. And that sometimes that's so beneficial. And you get that in the drawings, you know, a lot of the drawings are just me playing, feeling these feelings, adjusting, looking at the birds, noticing what they do, and then translating that. And so, however, with feelings, I felt like I really wanted to move away from this idea of all the binaries in all of our structured world. And so if I was going to tell you, love is this, joy is this, then, you know, you read the book and you're like, oh yes. If it makes you feel good, then it's like, oh yeah, I'm having a good day. If it like challenges you, you're like, oh no. But what happens with that nuance in between? You know, what happens with that ability to, for ourselves, choose what joy. Joy might not be like 100% for us, or it might be really difficult. You know, joy is not always easy for some folks. You know, it might be like, oh, I don't know what that feels like. And so the book was created as a place to explore. And I really mean that. The pages are almost blank. You know, there's going to be, Meryl's is completely blank. And that can be really intimidating. You know, a blank page can be really, really intimidating. And so the final copy is going to have just a little bit of like, hey, what might this feeling texture be? What might its color be? What message might it share with you right now? And then so that when we have that feeling again, then we can go back and be with our own sensations. Because a lot of, ideas of feelings have been kind of cooked into our culture, like good and bad. If you're frustrated, that's not good. It's like a bad feeling, like, oh, or if you're confused, that's even worse. In sometimes, we have this like idea of like, why can't confusion be a place where there's so many ideas and thoughts that we might just need to pause for a longer period of time?
And you said, before we hit record, you said you were incorporating a sentence or a phrase or something that called out two ingredients that were necessary. And so, as I want to explain for listeners that maybe aren't watching the video or haven't seen images yet, like what you see when you pull a card from this deck is a drawing of a human-like body with a bird head, and there is a word at the bottom. The one I'm holding up right now is frustrated. There's joy, there's nourishment, there's fearful, there's rest, there's listen, there's many, many words. And that's it. So I'm holding up frustrated. And then you mentioned that now that I'm looking at this, now that this is the emotion that I'm paying attention to, there are two ingredients to work with this. Yes. What are these two ingredients?
I wrote this down because I wanted all of us to not be so quick to just read and go on about with our day, but to let this be like a practice tool. So I said, for this journey, we need two main ingredients. And for this journey of somatically being with our feelings and emotion and getting to know them in another way, perhaps that is different than what we learned in that binary of good, bad, a desirable feeling, an undesirable feeling, a welcomed feeling, a shamed feeling. And those two main ingredients were trust and translation. So trust that whatever, our bodies, our minds are thinking, are feeling at that moment, we can go with it. Even if it's like, oh, I feel frustrated. And we just, we're like tight. And the other one is translation, because translation allows us to then see it or experience it in a new way. When we translate something, whether that's in our sound or whether that's in our body, it gives us almost like another little doorway to move. And then when we go back, and you can think about this as a journal to be with your feelings and to over time notice them, see how they change depending on the season, because we might just be like frustrated and hot and agitated, and then we're like, oh, this is happening in the summertime. When we might just be like hot. Our bodies just might be having the sensation of heat, and that might be translating into like frustration, or like, I need to get this heat out in some way. Or it might be like very, like I'm from a warm place, and from, my peoples are from an island that's really warm, and we're really loud, passionate, hot people who get angry and dance, and it's just a lot sometimes. So when we go to like cold places, like I don't know, Minnesota, because I've lived there, or even Paris, because it's colder. It's like, what is that? What is that weird specimen here with all this like fiery heat? And sometimes, we can feel unwelcomed just because people around us, or the culture around us, or the season around us is different.
Mm.
why birds migrate, you know?
Thanks for listening to Our Mindful Nature. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider sharing it with a friend or leaving me a review wherever you get your podcasts. It helps others to find the show, and let's face it, we could all use a few more meditators in our lives. Our Mindful Nature is recorded on Muskogee land and produced with the support of Brianna Nielsen. Deep gratitude is offered to acoustic ecologists Gordon Hempton and Nick McMahon for the use of their nature field recordings in many of these episodes. To join my live classes, ask questions, or learn about my teacher trainings, please visit merylarnett.com. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you next week.